What allowed Rome's armies to march endlessly across mountains, rivers, and deserts, and still arrive ready to fight? That's the question at the heart of this video. When we think of Rome's military dominance, most people picture battles, swords, and shields. But the real secret was movement. The Roman army wasn't just built to fight. It was engineered to move like a machine, turning discipline and endurance into power. Hello, we are Heroic History, your daily history channel, bringing you 30 minutes of history every day. If you want to shape what comes next on this channel, don't forget to subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. So today, we'll explore how Rome created an army it could march forever, looking at the soldiers, training and equipment, the roads and camps that supported them, the logistics that kept them fed, and the discipline that kept them in line, even when others faltered. When we picture a Roman legion on the march, it's easy to imagine glittering armor, the steady rhythm of boots on stone roads, and a column of men stretching as far as the eye could see. But what really made this picture remarkable wasn't just the sight. It was the endurance. A Roman soldier wasn't just a fighter. He was a walking machine, a human engine built for stamina, discipline, and endless mobility. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of centuries of hard lessons refined into a system during the late Republic. And at the heart of it all stood the reforms of Gaius Marius in 107 BC. Before Marius, Roman armies were largely made up of citizen farmers who served when called. They brought their own gear and returned home after the campaign. That system worked when Rome was fighting nearby wars. But as the Republic's borders expanded, it became unsustainable. Soldiers needed to be more professional, more reliable, and more self-sufficient. Marius's answer was simple but brutal. Every soldier would become a full-time professional and carry his own kit. Gone were the days when baggage trains of slaves and animals hauled the army's supplies. Instead, each man shouldered his own load. The soldiers quickly earned the nickname Marius's mules, a joke that stuck because it was true. Plutarch, the Greek historian, described how Marius cut down on baggage, forced men to carry their gear, and drilled them into becoming hardened campaigners. It might sound cruel, but this was genius. By reducing dependence on animals and wagons, Roman armies became faster, more flexible, and less vulnerable to supply disruptions. Where other armies were chained to their baggage trains, Rome could march light, cover ground quickly, and surprise the enemy. So, what did a Roman soldier actually carry with him on the march? Thanks to archaeology, ancient writers, and modern reconstructions, we've got a pretty clear picture. On average, a legionary hauled anywhere from 60 to 90 pounds. That's 27 to 40 kilos. The whole load was called the sarsana. It was tied to a wooden pole known as a furca, which rested on the shoulder. This setup was clever because it spread the weight across the body and left the soldier as hands free to grip his shield or weapon. Inside that pack was basically everything a man needed to fight, eat, and survive. First came the weapons and armor, the famous gladius, one or two throwing javelins called pila, a big rectangular shield, and protective gear that could be chainmail, scale armor, or the well-known segmented cuirass. The shield itself weighed over 12 pounds, and the armor could add another 20 to 25 pounds, depending on the type. Then there were the rations. Wheat grain was the staple, carried raw, so it could be ground into flour with small hand mills each soldier lugged along. That was turned into bread or porridge. On top of that came dried cheese, wine, oil, and sometimes salted meat. Caesar even mentioned soldiers carrying up to 5 days' worth of food when a campaign demanded fast movement. What really set the Romans apart, though, was the amount of tools they carried. Every soldier had what was basically a mini toolkit: a dalabra, a kind of axe pick, a shovel, a saw, wicker baskets, and sharpened stakes for camp defenses. Cooking pots sometimes came along too. The Jewish historian Josephus described them as walking tool chests, each man hauling saws, axes, hooks, and 3 days of food. Alongside all that came the personal and practical gear, things like a cloak, spare sandals, a water flask, and a few personal belongings. When you put it all together, this wasn't just a combat load, it was a survival kit. With it, Roman armies could march straight into enemy land and keep moving without waiting on supply wagons. Each soldier was basically a self-contained unit, tough enough to fight and equipped enough to live off what he carried on his back. To modern eyes, that much weight seems crushing. But the Romans thought differently. The whole system was designed for efficiency. By forcing each man to bear his own burden, commanders eliminated the logistical drag that slowed down most ancient armies. Appian, another historian, noted that even before Marius, generals like Scipio insisted that soldiers march on foot and carry their loads, forbidding them from riding animals unless absolutely necessary. The payoff was speed and security. An army less tied to baggage animals could take unexpected routes, move through rough terrain, and avoid ambushes aimed at supply lines. Modern scholars like Jonathan Roth, who study Roman logistics in depth, argue that this independence gave Rome a decisive advantage in wars of attrition. Of course, carrying the load was only part of the equation. The Roman soldier was trained relentlessly to make the impossible routine. Ancient military manuals describe a tough regimen. Vegetius, writing in the 4th century A but reflecting older traditions, records that a standard march was 20 miles in 5 hours. That's 4 miles an hour with full gear. Soldiers also trained to do 24 miles in 5 hours at a faster pace, and they drilled with weapons twice the weight of real ones to build strength. They were expected to run, swim, dig, and fight as part of daily training. Archaeological and modern studies confirm that this pace was sustainable. Military historians have calculated that a steady speed of about 1.3 meters per second, roughly 3 miles an hour, was the sweet spot. A column of tens of thousands could keep this up for days, though the rear of the line might arrive hours later than the front. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul often pushed soldiers to cover 15 to 20 miles a day, sometimes more when the situation demanded speed. What's astonishing isn't just the distance, it's the repetition. Roman legions could do this day after day and still have the energy to set up camp each evening. That's endurance at a level few armies before or since could match. The secret wasn't just muscle, it was mindset. Roman discipline turned hardship into habit. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, explained how rewards and punishments kept soldiers in line. At the extreme, the dreaded decimation, killing 1 in every 10 men of a disgraced unit, reminded soldiers of the price of failure. But more often, it was the rhythm of routine that mattered. Every night, no matter how far they marched, soldiers built a fortified camp. The layout was standardized with streets, ditches, palisades, and assigned positions. Pseudo-Hyginus, a Roman military writer, recorded detailed blueprints for these camps. This nightly ritual gave men a sense of order, safety, and predictability. In psychological terms, it turned exhaustion into normalcy. You marched, you built, you ate, you slept, and you repeated it the next day. Instead of breaking morale, the cycle reinforced it. Other armies collapsed under fatigue. The Romans simply adapted. Put all of this together, and you see why the Roman soldier was more than a fighter. He was a mobile engine of empire, capable of carrying his own supplies, building his own fortifications, and marching farther than most enemies thought possible. What often gets overlooked is the system that allowed those legions to keep moving day after day. Year after year, Rome engineered the march itself, turning travel into a weapon. The backbone of this system was the Roman road. Built straight, durable, and carefully measured, these roads acted like arteries that carried soldiers, supplies, and orders across the empire. Take the Appian Way, first built in 312 BC. Instead of following the easy curves of the landscape, Roman engineers forced a straight line across hills and valleys. The road had layers of stone and gravel, drainage ditches, and paving slabs designed to last for centuries. That kind of construction wasn't just about pride. It meant an army could cover 15 to 20 miles every single day without losing pace to mud, ruts, or broken ground. Ancient writers like Vegetius even described marching standards, 20 miles in 5 hours, as a kind of training benchmark. Later, historians and archaeologists confirmed that this wasn't an exaggeration. Roman soldiers really could keep up that tempo over long campaigns. There was strategy baked into the roads too. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't only poetic. It reflected a system where all distances were measured from the golden milestone in the Forum. In practice, this meant that Rome could move forces quickly to any frontier. Provinces weren't just connected politically. They were literally tied into a military highway system. That gave Rome an edge over enemies who still relied on dirt paths or seasonal tracks. But roads were only half the story. The other key to Rome's ability to march forever was the standardized marching camp, or castra. Every night, no matter where the army stopped, soldiers built a fortified camp laid out in the same pattern. Ancient sources like Polybius and Pseudo-Hyginus describe how each unit knew its place, from the commander's tent to the lines of legionaries. Trenches and palisades were dug, gates positioned, and streets marked inside. It was so standardized that a soldier could walk into a new camp and know exactly where his sleeping spot was without being told. This practice did more than provide shelter. It gave security against ambushes, order in daily life, and a routine that reinforced discipline. Imagine the psychological comfort of ending every long day of marching by setting up what felt like the same home base. It was a rhythm. March, build, eat, rest, guard, sleep. Repeated across years of campaigning, it turned exhaustion into habit. The backbone of the Roman soldier's diet was grain, usually wheat or barley. Archaeology, ancient texts, and modern studies all show that soldiers consumed around 0.8 to 1.5 kilograms of grain a day. That grain could be boiled into porridge or baked into bread. To make it last on campaign, it was often issued as hard biscuits called bucellatum, the Roman version of hardtack. Alongside grain came dried cheese, olive oil, and plenty of wine or posca, a sour wine vinegar drink. Meat was less common, but did appear in the form of salted pork or mutton. Excavations at places like Vindolanda in Britain show that Roman troops ate more meat than older writers once assumed. What made Rome different was that its soldiers didn't wait for supply wagons to bake bread for them. They carried the raw grain and even small hand mills to grind it into flour on the move. That meant each man could feed himself with what he carried. Sources describe soldiers being issued 3 to 5 days' worth of rations at a time, especially before a forced march. In effect, every legionary was a walk-in kitchen, able to grind, cook, and eat without relying on a central bakery. Of course, no army could fight forever on just what its men carried. That's where Rome's supply chains came in. Across the empire, the Romans built granaries called horia, essentially warehouses filled with grain. These fed both cities and armies. On campaign, the legions could draw from organized depots, requisition food from the local countryside, or transport supplies by road and river. This combination of fixed depots and flexible foraging gave the army a huge advantage. They were rarely tied to one single line of supply. Pack animals played a role too, but in a very controlled way. Donkeys, mules, and horses were the backbone of Roman transport. They carried extra rations, tools, and baggage. Wagons existed, but the Romans avoided relying on massive wagon trains. Wagons were clumsy, slow, and vulnerable to ambush. Instead, Rome kept its supply train light. The heavy loads, siege engines, or construction gear could move by wagon when needed. But the day-to-day supplies were spread out between men and animals. That balance meant the legion didn't crawl along like other ancient armies. It marched fast and steady. The organization was so precise that a marching column of thousands could stretch nearly half a mile down a road and still keep perfect order. Ancient sources describe cohorts lined up in columns with fixed spacing, about 20 feet between groups. So, even when moving over rough ground, the formation never bunched up or fell apart. Each cohort had its spot. Every centurion knew his duty, and the system made sure the army could turn, halt, or deploy into battle formation without confusion. The secret to this efficiency was communication. The Romans didn't rely on shouted orders alone. They used a mix of sound and sight that could cut through dust, wind, and chaos. Brass horns like the tuba, cornu, and bushina blasted out commands. One signal to advance, another to halt, another to shift formation. At the same time, standards the Aquila eagle, the vexillum flag, or the signum of each unit gave the men something to lock their eyes on. Even in smoke or the fading light of dusk, those markers kept the army lined up. Think of it like early GPS. As long as you followed the sound of the horn and the sight of the banner, you were where you needed to be. But order didn't come just from clever instruments. Discipline made it stick. Rome had some of the harshest military punishments in history. For serious breakdowns, commanders could order decimation, killing 1 out of every 10 men by lot. That wasn't common, but the threat hung heavy. Lesser punishments were frequent: flogging, docking pay, forcing extra digging duties, or making men stand watch longer than the rest. The idea was simple. Fear of disgrace or pain would keep you in line on the march. Still, Rome wasn't just about the stick. There was a carrot too. Soldiers marched with pride in their standards, knowing the eagle of their legion represented Rome itself. Losing one was a humiliation, so keeping formation was about honor as much as survival. Beyond pride, there were real rewards. Emperors gave out donatives, cash bonuses for loyalty. Plunder from campaigns was divided among the men. Most important of all, retirement brought land or pensions. Under Augustus, the Aerium Militare Fund was created to pay veterans, and colonies were established to give them farmland. Service wasn't just duty. It was a ticket to upward mobility, something rare in the ancient world. Daily drill reinforced all this. Marching in step wasn't natural, but repeated practice, sometimes up to 15 or 20 miles in a day, turned it into second nature. When you added all up, the fixed spacing, the horns and banners, the harsh punishments, the pride, and the retirement rewards, you get a picture of why the Roman army could march forever without falling into chaos. It was part machine, part family, and part iron-fisted system that demanded and rewarded obedience in equal measure. Once you line up the numbers and logistics, the contrast with Greece, Carthage, and the tribal barbarian forces is striking. Start with the Greeks. Classical Greek armies were citizen militias, not professional soldiers. A hoplite might carry his own shield and spear, but behind him trailed a baggage train full of slaves, attendants, and pack animals. Campaigns were short because the soldiers had to get back to their farms. Most city-states planned around seasonal campaigns, often limited to just a few weeks. Historians estimate that Greek forces moved slowly, hampered by their baggage and camp followers, and rarely marched more than 10 to 12 miles in a day. Their logistics assumed local foraging and nearby supply, not month-long advances across hostile territory. In short, the Greek system worked for a quick showdown on a plain near home, but not for year-long wars of movement. Carthage looked different. On the sea, they were unmatched, but on land, they leaned heavily on mercenaries. Hannibal's invasion of Italy shows the upside and downside of this approach. He started in 218 BC with around 50,000 men, crossing the Alps with an army drawn from Spain, North Africa, and Gaul. It was a stunning feat of generalship, but to sustain that force, he relied on local allies, captured supplies, and promises of Carthaginian support that sometimes fell short. Mercenaries fought hard, but expected regular pay, and they weren't always eager for endless marches if the money dried up. Carthage could launch bold strikes, but they lacked the logistical backbone to grind out long wars deep in enemy territory the way Rome could. Then there were the barbarian peoples of northern and central Europe. Archaeology and Roman writers describe them as fierce warriors, excellent at ambushes and quick raids. But most of their forces were war bands, not standing armies. They followed seasonal cycles, often disbanding after a raid or a single decisive battle. They didn't build the road networks, granaries, or permanent depots needed to feed tens of thousands of men for months. Without supply structure, long sieges or winter, campaigning far from home, were rare and risky. They could win spectacular victories, but they struggled to maintain the momentum afterward. Rome's edge was that it combined all the missing pieces. Soldiers carried 60 to 90 pounds of gear, including food and portable mills, which let each man sustain himself for days. Legions could cover 15 to 20 miles a day on their road network with supply depots, horia, and secure routes, feeding them grain and equipment. Pack animals were used strategically, not as a crutch, so the army wasn't slowed down by massive trains. Discipline and routine meant soldiers built fortified camps every night, keeping morale and order intact. That system turned wars into endurance contests. And in wars of attrition, Rome almost always came out on top. Rome built an army that could march seemingly forever. And the historical case studies show just how far this endurance could go. Take Julius Caesar in Gaul. His commentaries mention moments when Roman legions covered up to 25 miles, 40 kilometers, in a single day, sometimes in hostile territory, with full kit on their backs. This pace meant Caesar could appear where enemies least expected him. In 58 BC, during the Helvetii campaign, he marched across rivers, built bridges in days, and surprised migrating tribes before they could regroup. For enemies used to slower armies, Rome's ability to move like clockwork felt almost supernatural. Then there were the campaigns in Germania. The landscape was no friend to organized warfare. Dense forests, rivers that flooded without warning, and winters that could break weaker armies. Yet Rome managed to push deep into Germania with carefully coordinated marches. Archaeological finds like the marching camps near the Lippe River show how the legions would advance methodically, marching by day, then constructing fortified camps at night, often in less than 4 hours. Each camp could house thousands of men, their animals, and supplies. The very act of repeating this routine day after day, mile after mile, turned what could have been chaos into disciplined momentum. Germanic tribes, fierce in battle, lacked this sustained endurance. Rome could wear them down simply by continuing to advance while they fractured. Even at the far reaches of the empire, the Roman marching machine kept working. Along Hadrian's Wall in Britain, built around a D-122, soldiers not only manned fortresses, but also patrolled vast stretches of rugged terrain. Supply stations along the wall show how Rome kept these soldiers moving. Granaries, wells, and mile castles provided rest and replenishment. Records suggest soldiers on patrol could still march 10th to 15th miles a day in harsh northern weather, keeping pressure on local tribes and projecting Roman power far from the Mediterranean heartland. What ties all these cases together is the bigger picture. The Roman legion wasn't just an army. It was, in many ways, a moving civilization. Each soldier carried not just weapons, but the means to feed himself, build a camp, and sustain his comrades. Combined with Rome's road networks and logistical genius, this meant they could push deep into enemy territory without waiting for massive baggage trains. That endurance became Rome's secret weapon. The real strength of Rome's empire wasn't only its swords, spears, or siege engines. It was the disciplined feet of its soldiers. Step by step, mile after mile, they turned endurance into conquest and movement into control. Rome expanded and maintained a world-spanning empire because its armies could keep marching when others faltered. That's why, even centuries later, the image of the Roman soldier isn't just of a warrior. It's of a human engine built to march forever. At the end of the day, Rome's real military edge wasn't just sharper swords or tougher armor. It was the fact that they built armies that could march endlessly. That steady rhythm of movement day after day was the foundation of Rome's dominance. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and share button. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. This channel is all about exploring the stories behind the battles, the weapons, and the people who shaped our world. If that sounds like your kind of march, subscribe and become part of the Legion. We've got plenty more campaigns ahead. Thanks for sticking around until the end, and we'll see you next time.